Welcome. I'm delighted to see everyone here tonight for this very special event. This is a partnership between the Writers Guild and the Writers Guild Foundation. We're co-hosting this with the Mental Health Media Partnership, a joint program of the USC Annenberg School for Communication, the University of Pennsylvania's Annenberg Public Policy Center, and the National Mental Health Awareness Campaign. The partnership works with entertainment industry professionals to raise awareness and understanding of mental health issues, as we are hoping to do this evening. First, I would like to introduce the Dean of the Annenberg School of Communications, who I have known since I was 14 and had a crush on him. So you can see how well he turned out. He's not only the Dean of the Annenberg School, he's turned the school around and made it one of the premier communications institutions and journalism programs in the United States, and came to that program after heading up, quite brilliantly I might add, the Voice of America, Dean Jeff Cowan. Please stand. I'd also like to introduce to you Dale Kamer-Lieberfarb, who is heading up this mental health national mental health awareness campaign. Gail, where are you? I'm sorry. There you are. It's lovely to have you here. And I also want to recognize Barbara Lurie, who put this evening together and who is heads up the Mental Health Media Partnership. She's done a wonderful job. Where are you, Barbara? Did you stand up? Okay, good. The funding for this event was generously provided by the Annenberg Foundation Trust. And I don't know that Wallace Annenberg is here with us tonight, but wherever you are, thank you for the contribution. Probably what some of you don't know about me, unless you read the little flyer, that as president, I'm now president of the Writers Guild, for those of you who don't know me. But previously, I was a psychologist in private practice for 15 years before I got into film producing and writing. So I used to tell my friends that I went from treating the mentally ill to working for the mentally ill. So I have fair depth of understanding about the issues tonight. But in fact, one of the things that always troubled me was the aptitude with which film often dealt with mental illness and dealt with the mental health profession. So this is an important evening for me. I think we are used to seeing headlines that say mental patient kills 3 at a bus stop or mad slasher on the loose. And often people with emotional disorders are treated in a kind of with caricatures in films. Tonight we're going to look at the different face of mental illness. It's the face of Art Buchwald and William Styron, and literally millions of others who are plagued with psychiatric disorders but are successfully coping with them and overcoming them. Given that 1 out of 5 Americans will have a mental disorder in their lifetime, it's the face of many of us here tonight. It's even the guy who made the wine that we're going to be serving later, Francis Ford Coppola. He said in a 1991 Rolling Stones interview that he had been diagnosed with manic depressive disorder, and that my wife just gave me this William Styron book on depression. She said I should read it because it sounded like me. But the ones who get all the ink are usually the ones who screw up. So we all have a very lopsided view of mental illness. But there's no bright white light separating us from them or them from us. We all fall somewhere along the same continuum. No one goes through life really without contact with that dark and frightening feeling of depression or acute anxiety. And it's just part of life. But some go far more deeply into the hole of depression. Research suggests that mood disorders like mania and depression seem to take root in creative minds more than others. That's why we're here at the Writers Guild to talk about this. A few studies showing the relationship are summarized in the handouts that you have, along with the names of many who've traversed both the peaks of talent and the depths of despair. Hemingway, Van Gogh, Camus, and Sexton, and the list goes on and on. So we're left with the question, does creativity feed off mental turmoil, or does it cause it? Or is there some other synergy going on? Is a particularly acute and sensitive mind especially fertile soil for dark thoughts and despair? Or are dark thoughts fertile soil for great novels? Virginia Woolf described her bouts with bipolar disorder in much of her work. She once said, "I'm married, and then my brains went up in a shower of fireworks. As an experience, madness is terrific, and not to be sniffed at. And in its lava, I still find most of the things I write about. It shoots out of one everything shaped, final, not in mere driblets, as sanity does." As everyone knows, she paid for the privilege of having this particular muse in her life. Here's a scene from The Hours depicting her trying to keep these fireworks from imploding.
You could tell me exactly what you think I'm doing? How would it look to you when you weren't there?
You're working in the garden.
You disturbed me when you disappeared.
I didn't disappear. Went for a walk.
A walk! Is that all? Just a walk. You know, we're going home now and Edith's cooking dinner. She's already had a very difficult day. It's just our obligation to eat an Edith's dinner.
It's not obligation. What's that obligation?
You have an obligation to your own sanity.
Yours is custody. Yours is in... Everywhere. I am attended by doctors who inform me of my own interest.
They know your interest.
They do not.
It is. I can see that it must be hard for a woman of your talent to see that she may not be the best judge of her own condition. You have a history! You have a history of confinement. We brought you to Richmond because you have a history of sick, rude, stuck out, hearing voices. We brought you here to save you from the irreversible damage you intended upon yourself. You tried to kill yourself twice. And they're showing you that, right? I set up the press. We set up the printing press not just for itself, not just purely for itself, but so that you might have a ready source of absorption and a remedy.
I needed what?
It was done for you! It was done for your betterment! It was done out of love! If I didn't know you better, I would have been gratitude.
You call me ungrateful. My life has been stolen from me. Living in a town I have no wish to live in. I have no wish to live in.
Film. Antoine Fisher is another writer who dug into his own mental landscape for inspiration. In his epiphanous film, he shows that to heal emotional scars, you have to go backward before you can go forward. And you have to get professional help to do it. There's a scene between him and his psychiatrist, played by Denzel Washington.
Okay. Never had a real Thanksgiving at the Tates before.
You didn't have a real well either, yes.
Yeah, a real nice family. Thank you. This for you. for having me over today.
Get some money.
Oh. Yeah, see without my glasses. Why don't you read it to me? Why don't you read it, please?
Who will cry for the little boy?
Lost and all alone.
Who will cry for the little boy? Abandoned without son. Who will cry for the little boy?
He cried himself to sleep.
Who will cry for the little boy?
Who never had for keeps. Who will cry for the little boy who walked the burning sand. Who will cry for the little boy, the boy inside the man. Who will cry for the little boy who knew well hurt and pain. Who will cry for the little boy who died and died again. Who will cry for the little boy, a good boy he tried to be. Who will cry for the little boy who cries inside me. Who will cry for the little boy that's one? I will. I will always be. Answer a lot of questions.
You don't have any questions. You're saying
Did you feel like you were risky? Maybe they didn't know. No. That's the question you need to ask them.
we're God without you, slight influence.
That's Webster's definition of forgiveness. You don't have to forgive to free yourself. So that you can get on with your life. Well, I gotta go look for my family. How about you, God?
There are at least two other films on the horizon that will probe writers' own struggles with psychiatric disabilities. Prozac Nation, based on Elizabeth Wurzel's book, and Ted and Sylvia, about the life and ultimate suicide of poet Sylvia Plath. There's no doubt that the turbulence of emotional and mental problems are powerful grist for the storyteller's mill. My own first film, called The Last Bus Chair, was the story of a patient and a therapist. The patient was dying, but the journey was an equally powerful one for both the patient and the therapist. It was my own personal story. Now, of course, probably the best known film, and one that I admire greatly on mental illness, is A Beautiful Mind, which, unless you're living under the cliff unless you're living under a cliff overhung somewhere, you know went on to win the Best Picture of the Academy Award. When Frank Pearson, president of the Academy, told us he had to fly to London unexpectedly and couldn't be our moderator, we found the perfect replacement. Akiva Goldsman won his own Academy Award for screenwriting of A Beautiful Mind and has harvested a slew of awards from mental health organizations for his compassionate portrayal of schizophrenia. The insight and the heart that he put into the film no doubt stemmed from his early years. Both his parents were psychotherapists who operated a program for emotionally disturbed children right in the home where he grew up. Akiva brilliantly crafted the story so that those of us in the audience would go along the journey and see the hallucinations and believe they were real as to the patient, rather than looking at the patient as a distant and strange person. Ever since A Beautiful Mind, Akiva's been so closely tied with mental health issues that people forget that his writing credits include some other major motion pictures, The Client, Batman Forever, and A Time to Kill. It's my great privilege to introduce Akiva Goldsman. And now we have a couple of other people to introduce. After making millions of us laugh in his syndicated column carried by more than 540 newspapers, and 32 books, and a winning Pulitzer Prize in the process, Art Buchwald isn't exactly thought of as the poster boy of depression, as he has dubbed himself. But mental disability is an equal opportunity affliction. And from time to time, it has dimmed the twinkle in his eye so that he so prolifically transfers to his pen. He comes to us from his home in Martha's Vineyard to share his insights with us. I know him as a tennis partner, where he is known on the vineyard for his extraordinary lob. He can lob you to death. So it's a great privilege to welcome Leopold Lob, also known as Art Buchwald. And finally, William Styron. Nobody has written more cogently, more powerfully about depression than Mr. Styron. He has won just about every writing award around, including the Pulitzer Prize, either because of or despite it being plagued by what he calls hell's black depths. In 1990, he chronicled his struggles in Darkness Visible, a memoir of madness, in writing so pure, as a reviewer put it, that one is hardly aware of the ink on the page. The book has become a Bible for everyone who has had to tread their own dark waters. From my own background and experience, it came as such a relief because I'd spent years reading clinical texts that never really captured the experience, and in fact, I think made physicians and therapists more distant to their clients. A couple of people who RSVP'd for this event mentioned that they couldn't wait to hear him because his book got them through their own isolating despair. So we don't have to wait any longer. Welcome, William Styron.
Can you hear us? Okay. Thank you all for coming out on a rainy day to talk about depression. Good thinking. I'm your moderator tonight. I will give about 4 words in edgewise because these two need to be kept separate. We have one ground rule, always stay on. Short of that, we're going to cover every topic we can. I've been asked to talk a little bit about my own experience with mental health before tossing the ball, and I will. My experience with mental health starts, like so many people's, with my family history. My mother, after the death of her mother by suicide, managed to escape World War II and the camps and came here, found herself working with children who in those days were referred to as emotionally disturbed. That was, by the diagnostics at the time, childhood autism or childhood schizophrenia, a disease that no longer exists, a funny trick of funding. And I don't know why she related so well to the children that she met. Sometimes I think she saw for real what they saw in their mind's eye. But whether the monsters that were chasing them were the same ones that were chasing her. They seemed to have a common experiential base. So my mother and my father felt it would be fun to open up a group home for these children in my house. My mother's writings often include somebody bouncing the baby against the wall or hanging the baby out the window. I would be the baby. And nobody told me that all the children that I lived with were crazy. So I didn't know. What I knew was that, at least in our mind's eyes, at home they all seemed perfectly reasonable. Whether they were pushing fire off their shoulders or running from a man in the coat rack or watching a horse float by the third-story window. Everything's perfectly reasonable to them. They lived in a world of reason. It just wasn't a reason we understood. It took me many years to understand that what we call madness, be it depression, schizophrenia, everything on the lighter end of the continuum, all these are systems of perception that make perfect sense to the sufferer. We have a tendency to look at those with diagnoses as outside ourselves, and they're not. They are our carnival mirrors. They are us. And the day we forget that is the day that we objectify and the day that we cease to be compassionate. I am flanked by two men who have done an extraordinary job of reminding us of our humanity. And so with that, I'll give it over to Art. Opening remarks.
Can we do it from here?
Yeah, do it from here.
Okay. First of all, I'd like to see the hands of all those who have either had a depression or someone in the family has had one.
Amazing.
Now, who is against the war? Couldn't have gotten a better panelist tonight. I'm a humorist, and I had two depressions. And the first one was in 1963, and the second one in 1985. I wouldn't recommend either one. Years ago, Larry King asked me to come out of the closet with Mike Wallace. I hesitated because being a funny man would hurt my reputation as people would know my dirty, dark secret. It didn't turn out that way. Larry King had the most successful show he ever had. I called him up the next day and said he had the most depressed audience in America. Many things happened after the show. I received a letter from a woman who said I had saved her life. And it turns out that she had taken an overdose of pills. And then she flipped over and she looked on the screen, and there I was saying, don't do anything to hurt yourself. You'll be sorry. And don't commit suicide because you'll change your mind 2 weeks later. And in her letter, she said that she figured it was a sign. So she ran to the bathroom, put her finger in her mouth, and whooped up all the pills. And I felt very good about this because one person, just one person, was affected by this. I myself was in the process of committing suicide. I thought about it a lot. But I was afraid that the day I did it, the New York Times would have no space for the obituary. My fear was that General de Gaulle would die on the same day and get all the headlines. There's a lot of humor. Strangely enough, there is humor involved with everything. And I was in a taxi after the Larry King show, and I said, and the taxi driver said to me, "Weren't you on Larry King?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "Do you take Prozac?" I said, "No." And he said, "My dog does." And I said, "How's he doing?" He says he's much better. And then when I was hospitalized, I remembered this scene. There was a lady, old lady, I don't know how old she was, and she got dressed every day in a beautiful suit, and a hat, and white gloves, and she walked down the aisle towards the door. And she got 3 feet from the door, and there was a sign which said, "That's far enough, Mrs. Rosenberg." And she turned around and walked back. And she did this every morning. There's a price to pay for everything. People ask, "How did you become a humorist?" And I always replied, "First you have to have an unhappy childhood." And I qualified for that because after my mother was born, she was taken away from me and put in a mental institution for 35 years. I never saw her, and my first home that my father put me in was run by Seventh-day Adventists. So from the age of like 4 months old till I was 5, I was raised by the Seventh-day Adventists. I couldn't have meat, I couldn't have fish, and the devil was there all the time. And he's still there. Because when people do that job on you at that age, it never leaves you. It stays with you forever. And so then my father one day said, he took us out. And when I was writing my book, Leaving Home, I said to my sisters, "Why did Pop, a nice Jewish man, keep me in a Seventh-day Adventist home?" And my sister, who was very protective, said, "He didn't know." And I said, "When did he find out?" And my sister said, "When you started singing, 'Jesus Loves You.'" Well, I became a foster child. The Hebrew Orphan Asylum, I was put there, my father put me there, and then I became a foster child. And I was in a series of foster homes, which is not the greatest thing in the world. And when I was 8 years old, I said, "This is ridiculous. I'm going to become a humorist." So I can make the kids laugh. I can make them laugh. And that's all I wanted in life. And that's all the love I wanted. Now, making them laugh. But the scars were there as a foster child. And one of the biggest one was, and it was like Orson Welles and Citizen Kane, is it was a snowy night. And I went to a hill, and I said to one of the kids who had a sled, "Can I have a ride on your sled?" And he said, "No." And his friend said, "Let him have a ride. His mother's dead." And I went down the hill, screaming, "She's not dead, she's not dead." That night, I made up my mind I'd never ask anything from anyone again. And it stayed with me till this day. And the thing is that I was able, with humor, to cover up my depressions. I could get away with it. And that's what a lot of people are involved with, is that you cover it up with something. In my case, it was humor. And then I was in Paris, and I was having a good time, and suddenly I came back to the United States, and I had my first depression. And it was terrible. And I said, why me? And I also was trying to figure out all these things from my childhood that I had covered up and had built a wall around me. And that is how I went through my first depression. And it was terrible. It was awful. And I wanted to kill myself. And I wanted to do this. And so my doctor said at that moment, the psychiatrist, I can feel your pain. And I said, you're full of it. If you didn't have a depression, you cannot feel someone else's pain. And that's the way I felt about doctors who tell you, you're going to have a depression. Now, the one thing about my friend here, Mr. Styron, is I had a depression. This was a bipolar one in 1985. And I had it first. And I was hospitalized with it. And then, after I had died, about 3 months later, Phil had his. And then Mike Wallace had his. So the three of us, the three musketeers, all had depressions. So then, after Bill came out of it, I actually did therapy on Bill. I talked about committing suicide. I tried to talk him into going to a hospital. He finally went. He'll tell you probably why. He went to the hospital. And his wife here, Rose, was going crazy because he was such a pain in the neck. And he was very depressed. So then he came out of the depression, and he said, I'm going to write a book on depression. And he went and he wrote a book which sold millions of copies because it was a real wonderful book on depression. And when it was doing so well, I said to Bill, I want to find his fee. And he said, I'm not going to give it to you. And I said, but if it hadn't been for me, you wouldn't be here now to write the book. And then I said, all right, if you're not going to give me a finder's fee, when you were at the depths, I said to you, when you get better, you have to buy me the best meal in New York. That was the deal. At that time, he agreed. When he got better, he said, I don't remember it. Now, there are certain tricks involved with depression, and they're really interesting ones. For example, I was homicidal, not suicidal, homicidal. And somebody would be running down the street, this was in Martha's Vineyard, walking down the street, and I say, I wonder what would happen if I killed him. Well, that's a pretty damn scary thing. So I went to a psychiatrist in Martha's Vineyard, a lovely lady. She said to me, I told her how scared I was and everything. And she said to me, the mother says 10 times a day, I'm going to kill my children. But you don't mean it. So she just says it. So you say it, even though you don't do it. And she says, and then open up your brain and let those thoughts pour out of your brain, and also rub your stomach when you have those feelings. And if it didn't work. After 8 weeks, I stopped rubbing my stomach, and it still worked. And so that was a trick. Another trick was when I had a depression and I was very down, my wife came to visit me, and when she left, I looked at the table, and there was a picture, framed picture, of my 3 children. And I just looked at it, and I said, I can't leave them. Can't leave them behind. So there are a lot of tricks that you don't have to be a doctor to do. And the other thing is, and this is very important, Mary Wallace was pretty damn mad because Mike had his depression, and he was throwing all the stuff at her. She'd make a meal, he wouldn't eat it. He made her the butt of everything. And she got very angry. So she went to a psychiatrist, and she said, he's treating me like dirt. And you do that with someone you love when you're in depression. You take it out on that person. So she started an organization, which I think is everywhere now, and it's like Allion, Alcoholics Anonymous for spouses. And you could go there and exchange all the stuff that was happening to you. And it was very helpful. And if you have one here, I hope so. And if you don't, get it together, because it's conducted by a psychiatrist, it's by the group therapy, and you find out that you're not the only one who's getting beat up because your husband had a depression. Now, I don't want to continue, but I'm having a good time. I think I'll tell you a story at the end, because it had to do with Doris Warner, who was married to Mervyn LeRoy. Doris Warner was the daughter of Harry Warner. I was in Paris with a group at the Tour d'Argent, and I was sitting next to her, and I said, you know, Doris, you and I had something in common. I was at the Hebrew Orphan Asylum, and your father contributed to the beautiful gym, the Warner Gymnasium. And she got very white. She says, how dare you bring up that name? Why? She said, I was a little girl. My father dressed me up in a beautiful outfit, and I had to go there when I was 6 and 7 and 8 and hand out Hanukkah presents to you people. And you all sneered at me. Said, I was in psychiatry for 20 years before I got over that, and now you bring it up again here in Paris. And the thought occurred to me, here we were, 2 people in Paris. Her scarred by the fact that she had to give me presents, and I was scarred by the fact I had to take them. Thank you.
Bill, did you prepare?
Yeah, thank you. I'm going to give you that dinner someday. Someday. Anyway, Artie and I have been companions in suffering and in joy for a long, long time. How long is it? 50 years? When he was a columnist in Paris, he was very well known, and I was a fledgling novelist. I'd just written my first novel, and I was eager for publicity and all that sort of thing. I already had this famous column. He was always saying to me, he says, I'm going to try and get you in my column. There's always John Huston or Evelyn Keyes. I waited in vain for Buchwald to mention me in his column. He never did. And even in recent years, you failed me on that. However,
you're a liberal.
Anyway, we have had this bond, which is the one he described, this communal depression, this link, and I've always reflected on how they differed. Mine was, as most people know, who've read my little book on the story, is unipolar, and as opposed to bipolar. And before I had ever suffered this depression, that particular year that Hardy's describing, 1985, I hadn't the faintest inkling of what constitutes depression. It was a catchword to me. It had no resonance, no relevance, no meaning whatsoever. I would read that so-and-so was depressed. Or occasionally I would read someone was depressed and later committed suicide. And this was something that perplexed me, but it had no resonance. I couldn't understand why someone who had this rather wimpy word, depression, would end up in the act of self-destruction. And the revelation for me, that particular year, focuses on one single word. And to me, it's the most important word in an understanding of what really depression, serious depression, I'm talking about clinical depression, is. And that word is a very simple word. It's pain. Pain. I had not realized that the experience of real depression is every bit as painful as having a broken limb that doesn't mend and continues and continues. And this was an incredible revelation to me. I remember during the latter stages of my own experience with depression, before I went to the hospital in the early winter of '85, I was walking with my daughter, Polly, through a kind of a drizzling rain, horrible evening. And I remember telling her that I would rather, at this moment, have a limb amputated without anesthesia than to be suffering the agony I was suffering at that moment. And this was no stretch of the truth. There's a passage, I want to get to a kind of interplay, a discussion between all three of us rather soon, and I don't want to go into an extended discussion on my own monologue, but I do want to read a brief passage from my book, Darkness Visible, and I think it tries to amplify what I've just said about pain, because to me, this is what most people who have never experienced it don't understand. There is a threshold of pain, and that is described by the probable inability of the psyche to absorb pain beyond predictable limits of time. There's a region in the experience of pain where the certainty of alleviation often permits superhuman endurance. We learn to live with pain in varying degrees daily, or over longer periods of time, and we are more often than not mercifully free of it. When we endure severe discomfort of a physical nature, our conditioning has taught us since childhood to make accommodations to the pain's demands, to accept it, whether pluckily or whimpering and complaining, according to our personal degree of stoicism, but in any case, to accept it. Accepting intractable terminal pain, there's almost always some form of relief. We look forward to that alleviation, whether it be through sleep or Tylenol or self-hypnosis or change of posture, or most often through the body's capacity for healing itself. And we embrace this eventual respite as the natural reward we receive for having been temporarily such good sports and doughty sufferers, such optimistic cheerleaders for life at heart. But in depression, this faith in deliverance, in ultimate restoration, is absent. The pain is unrelenting, and what makes the condition intolerable is the foreknowledge that no remedy will come, not in a day, an hour, a month, or a minute. If there's a mild relief, one knows that it is only temporary. More pain will follow. It is hopelessness, even more than pain, that crushes the soul. So the decision-making of daily life involves not, as in normal affairs, shifting from one annoying situation to another less annoying, or from discomfort to relative comfort, or from boredom to activity, but moving instead from pain to pain. One does not abandon even briefly one's bed of nails, but is attached to it wherever one goes. And this results in a striking experience, one which I've called, borrowing military terminology, a situation of the walking wounded. For in virtually any other serious sickness, a patient who felt similar devastation would be lying flat in bed, possibly sedated and hooked up to the tubes and wires of a life support system, but at the very least in a posture of repose and in an isolated setting. His invalidism would be necessary, unquestioned, and honorably attained. However, the sufferer from depression has no such option, and therefore finds himself like a walking casualty of war, thrust into the most intolerable social and family situations. There he must, despite the anguish devouring his brain, present a face approximating the one that is associated with ordinary events and companionship. He must try to utter small talk and be responsive to questions, and knowingly nod and frown, and God help him, even smile. But it is a fierce trial attempting to speak a few simple words. Now that, I think, is, to me, is the essential description of what depression really is. And if the people who are dealing with friends or lovers or whatever who are suffering from depression could only understand that the person, the victim, the sufferer of this depression, is undergoing excruciating pain, I think this would help the stigma and the suffering itself. And I'd like to use this as a kind of a jump-off point for further discussion on this matter.
When I get depressed, which I do, the first thing I have to do is become very still. I can't, I think it started when I was small, but I need to get as close to the ground as possible, usually the floor, and put my cheek on it. And I get scared when that happens. I think that this is a harbinger of a return of an episode. I'm interested in what your relationship is to depression now. Does it with you as a threat?
Yes, it's always a threat. I'm never free of it. And unfortunately, I had a recurrence 3 years ago, which was even worse than the one that I described in Darkness Visible. It was excruciating, and I won't go into great detail because it's embarrassing to familiar about such matters as all the physical decline I went into. But I came close to buying the farm, as they say. I lost 40 pounds and ended up in Mass General in a severe state of delirium. And however, I pulled out of it. Which is, I think, testimony once again to the fact, the most important fact outside of the pain factor that we have about the experience of depression is that in virtually every case, even the worst suffering, even the worst experience can be surmounted and the victim can win the battle. This seems to be a truism that we have to hold on to.
What would each of you say is, if you could characterize that which was most significant in healing? Was there something that pulled
first
you out?
of all, change in many cases triggers depression. It could be a marriage, it could be that broke up, it could be, and the biggest one for all of us with caused change was 9/11. They took away our center. And those people that were on the verge of doing something, the 9/11 was the trigger. And I had a psychiatrist tell me that after 9/11, this was in New York, more people were changing. A guy wanted to break up with his wife, another guy wanted to quit his job. So sometimes you can do it without, if you're lucky, without change. But once change comes, you can cause that. Now, healing is a thing that's very important in terms of time. Each person has a different time to heal. Some people can do it in a month, some people in 6 months. And the thing about it is that when you heal, you don't want to go back there again. You really don't. So after a depression, you'll fight it as hard as it can. Now, the difference between Bill and I is that I have been helped very much by pills. I take Zoloft, I take Welcome, cost me a fortune, an absolute fortune. And I wrote a column once saying that the pills are so expensive, the antidepressant pills, that now people will put them in their safe deposit for investment. And a beautiful Zoloft pill sold by the Annenberg collection went for $25,000. And a Smith and Sotheby one of Valiant went for $40,000. Well, what I'm saying is that the damn government, and I say damn government, doesn't really take into consideration what's going on in this business we're talking about tonight. And Teddy has a bill there, but they're still not paying attention to mental health. And I was on a panel on stigma, because that's what part of mental health is, the stigma that you carry with it with a depression. So if you work for General Motors, or if you work for GE, or you work for a big company, and it comes out on the screen that you had a depression, you don't get a demotion, you even get fired. So I did the stigma thing with Rod Steiger. He was on there, and Susan St. James, I think. And I said, very smart, I said, it's not a problem for people like ourselves, stigma, because we can overcome it, and people can say, oh, he's okay if he has one. But it's stigma for these people. And Rod Steiger got very mad, and he said, I was blackballed from the health insurance and the movie insurance for 5 years because it was on my record I had a depression. So it's there, and that is one of the things we have to work on. We can't just come here and listen. You have to get out there, drive them crazy about making mental health as important as his broken leg.
Well, what is your reluctance to rely on medication?
I have a reluctance to rely on medication largely because I happen to be hypersensitive, and I seem to chronically overreact in the negative way to medications. I'm convinced that it's a horrendous accusation against a simple pill, but the episode I had several years ago, which put me in Mass General for several months, was, I'm convinced, due to the ingestion of a single capsule of Wellbutrin, which caused me within 6 hours. I had been feeling low, and I went to a psychiatrist who prescribed Wellbutrin. Within 6 hours of taking the first pill, I was profoundly suicidal. And I can only explain the causality as, once again, perhaps not indicting Wellbutrin so much, but my hypersensitivity to virtually all kinds of pharmaceuticals. So I'm very wary for that reason, and it puts me in a bind because it does preclude my using certain medications that might pull me out of it. But I'm by now so cautious that I just don't use medication.
One of the things that part of depression, it's a very big part of depression, is lack of energy. Don't want to even get out of bed. You don't want to do anything. And that is a terrible thing when you don't have energy. And that's why, in my case, my pills have helped me very much to give me energy. And it takes time to balance them. You can't get them overnight. They have to be balanced. And I have argued with Bill a lot about the fact just because one didn't work doesn't mean another would work. And so Mike and I are always on his back about if you're unhappy, you don't have to take it if you're happy. But if you're unhappy, give it a shot, because there are so many out there now, and they're there for a purpose. And they are expensive, and the drug companies are cleaning up on these. They're cleaning up on these.
He's a pusher.
I can tell. What? Are you a pusher for Celexa or not?
What?
I have some. Let me ask you both a question. You know, what's come up earlier is this idea that there's a relationship between mental illness, specifically depression, and creativity. What do you think?
Absolutely. Yeah, there is a connection. There's I think some people in this room might be aware. Sorry. Does that mean you?
Go ahead.
There was a famous study done 20, 30 years ago at the University of Iowa Writers' Workshop by a very sensitive and responsible woman psychiatrist who did an in-depth survey of the poets and writers and other literary artists there. And she made a totally convincing case that there was a hugely disproportionate incidence of depression among writers and poets, especially poets, as opposed to the general population. And this has been used as a kind of yardstick for many years. And other studies have corroborated that, whether the depression causes the creativity or vice versa. It's the chicken and egg argument. I don't know, but I do know, I believe 100%, with 100%.
Never been used before. And instead of being worse, it's better because of the stroke. And I really felt pretty good about that.
Really know where to go. A lot of, I don't know, but sometimes these experiences for me are voyeuristic, which is I go and I watch a panel because I'm wondering whether or not I fit the category. How would I know, do you think, if I were suffering from clinical depression? And if I was, what would you recommend I do?
Energy. If you don't have energy, it's the first sign that you're having depression, I think. I don't know who does that. And funny enough, when Bill and he got better, we would sit around talking about our depressions like going to the ball game or something. And I remember Bill saying to me, my depression was 9.9 on the Richter scale. And yours was just a rainy day at Disneyland. True. But, I don't know who fits the category that should have a depression and who shouldn't. Because Bill has a wonderful thing about the lawnmower. Tell him that mine.
Well, it's just my theory about the human race. It's that there are three categories that at the top, the tiny elite at the top are, I call them life enhancers. And at the bottom, a vast number of people, including most of the politicians in this country, I call well poisoners. And in the middle, the lonely middle, the humble middle, are the lawnmowers. And I think that sort of is really...
I don't know if the people who are the most talented are also the people who are part of easier to get a depression. Now, I do know, when I talked about triggers before, if you don't have a job, you're a lot more depressed than if you had a job. And we're seeing that more and more with guys is going home and they have no jobs, and it's very sad. And also, a lot of depression is going on in a family because everyone feels you're not worth anything if you can't get a job.
Okay. But do you agree? I think people are starting to believe, and I think research starts to point out that depression starts to cut across socioeconomic lines. It starts to, it's prevalent sometimes despite your circumstance, that the symptoms are not exactly what everybody imagined. Sometimes when people are depressed, they eat a lot. Sometimes they don't eat at all. Sometimes when they're depressed, they're sleepy and low energy.
A lot, or God mercy, don't sleep.
You can be very energized and be depressed. I think it's elusive skill to try to name it.
The other thing about that, what you're saying is that a lot of it is inherited. The genes that causes the depression. My mother, they called her a schizophrenic. We never found out exactly what. She was there for 35 years. And her brother also had something, schizophrenia or whatever they called it at that time. So you got all sorts of things, like a lot can be in your family. And the gene is there.
And I might add one other thing. To me, and it's a personal thing with me, but I think it's corroborated universally, or at least generally, is this interesting matter of the loss of a parent in childhood. I've read so much on this factor. In fact, I lost my mother when I was 13. Virginia Woolf lost her mother when she was 13. So many people who suffer delayed depression become depressives in later life, including, I might add, Abraham Lincoln, have had this wrenching loss of a parent at this critical age of puberty. It seems to be a critical factor. And I'm convinced that this, coupled with this theory which is called incomplete mourning, where when you suffer this loss, it doesn't make the proper impact on you. You shrug it off. You stoically let it fall away from you, and you store it up in yourself until a later time in life. This, I think, is another contributing factor to this complex issue about how so often the death of a parent can cause this excruciating later experience.
So if medications are not available as a way out, then what do you recommend?
I would, if medications don't seem to be the answer, then I think that shop-worn term, talk therapy, is often a very valuable adjunct to sitting down either with a professional, preferably, probably, with a good professional, or someone very close, someone whom you trust. I think it can be a very important contributing factor to recovery. It's sort of medication. It's my own feeling.
Did you find that to be the case as well, or simply medication?
Well, I had, in both cases, I had a psychiatrist, and the second time around, I had a wonderful lady psychiatrist, and she became my mother. And we went over the background. Now, the background was all the areas which I had hid from everyone. And we worked with dreams, and we saw not my mother's face, but just a figure of her walking in different places. And, I kind of denied, since I didn't have a mother, and I didn't need one. And this is not true. We all need some kind of mother. Good mother, bad mother. We have to have a mother. And that's what I found out. I found out different things. And it helps me in my life now because I'm not afraid anymore. I am not afraid because these things that scared me before don't scare me anymore.
Well, we are the Writers Guild, so it's probably important to hit on portrayals of mental illness. I think back to, remember Charlie? Hours for Algernon? Remember that Daniel Keyes story? I mean, we don't seem to be doing it particularly well as a business. And we do seem to vilify. It does seem to be that we choose to make, I think, for at least a decade, the mentally ill were the villain of choice. Do you think that's changing? Have you seen portrayals that you like, ones that you particularly don't like? And is there sort of any counsel to writers, of which I'm assuming there are several in the room, who might want to have characters with mental illness in their screenplay?
Well, in a general sense, I don't know. I can't answer about screenwriting because I've done very little of it myself. But in terms of writing as creating attitude toward mental illness, I'm heartened by the fact that I believe in the last, I'm being improvising, but 20 years, let us say, there's been an extraordinary sense of a sensitivity and an understanding and awareness of the need for empathy and dealing with, in a book or article, with the issue of mental illness. Some of the portrayals in the past, especially in the 19th century, in novels, were gross and horrible because mentally ill people were treated like animals. They were ridiculed and demonized. And I think there has been, despite what Art rightly says about the stigma that still exists, despite that, there has been an extraordinary opening up, I think, in the last couple of decades of an understanding of what the agony of mental illness is. Respect, a newfound respect for the ordeal of mental illness in literature.
Well, you know, it's very interesting. The brain is just this big. That's all it is. And yet it's supposed to do everything. Everything. The brain is supposed to do that. And this is what causes depression. This is what causes elation. This is what causes everything. And it's amazing if you want to get religious about it or something, that's all we have. Without it, we'd be nothing. So I've always been, when I get really serious about things, which is not often, I think to myself, what a miracle it is that we have the ability to do all the things, and think and talk and all that. And I'm really flabbergasted by it. And I think also I am flabbergasted, like him, about the fact that they found out certain things that can help the brain, serotonin and things like that, that will help you. And before that, there was nothing out there. When you're talking about movies, the movie I remember the most is The Snake Pit. That was years ago. But you still, if you go around to a lot of places, there are still snake pits. Just don't, there's not enough attention being paid to that either.
I had an interesting experience just trying to figure out how to write about the mentally ill, which I will throw in, which is, it was before Beautiful Mind. I was going to try to do something on multiple personality disorder, which is now called dissociative identity disorder, and I sort of was winging it. And then I went up to Camarillo and I met with a patient, and I realized that unlike other things that I write, if I'm writing a lawyer movie, I'll pretend to read a law book. Or a superhero movie, I'll watch a cartoon. I mean, I'll do something. I really do research, but when it came to portraying the mentally ill, I didn't bother. I just kind of did it. It was a collage of associations that I had about the name of the diagnosis. And that became simply a way to create a character that suited my plot. I think we have a tendency to underplay the specificity of the truth of these conditions. And it is remarkable, we'll talk about empathy, how much empathy human contact engenders. My only counsel, if I have any, about writing Gunna, people with actual diagnoses, is talk to them. They see the world a little bit.
Yeah, I would certainly endorse that. And I would add, if anyone asks me, as one who's been through there, to come back to tell the tale, that outside of the issues I've mentioned, like pain and loss of parents, so on, the factor that I think is essential in the administering of depression, of dealing with it, is the absolute need of support on the part of whoever is close to the victim. That is the family, whether it's a wife or lover, family member. Too often, the ignorance still prevails, and too often the person who's suffering from depression exists in absolute isolation and loneliness because he or she is surrounded by not love and caring, but by suspicion and often even hostility. And my wife, Rose, is in the audience here. She was essential to my recovery. I would have gone off the dock, as we say, had it not been for this solicitude and caring. And I just wanted to mention this because I think the audience here is responsive to give and take of advice of that sort. And this is totally essential to my mind to the recovery of depression.
And the thing about that is you have to have patience because people don't react. He could have a stone wall, which he did, and I had one when I was in a depression. And people talked to me constantly. They were smart enough to know, not to ignore me. And so this bullshit about being pulled up by your bootstraps is nonsense. You have to listen to the person. And I did it with Bill, and I did it with Mike, and people have done it to me. And one of the reasons you do it to other people is it helps you. It helped me to talk to Bill. It helped me to talk to Mike. And so there's kind of a therapy going on between friends and people. And the ones that you trust the most, in this case, Bill trusted me, is because I had a depression. And it was very hard for him to talk to people who didn't have one.
He called me up on a beautiful spring day, and he would say, "What's it like out there? Isn't it? It's a beautiful spring day." And he says, "But it really sucks, doesn't it?" Of course it did. I mean, the most glorious spring day in history could still be a...
There were also nights when he called me up and says, "I'm going to do it. I can't stand it anymore." And I said, "That's not acceptable.
That's right.
Put your coat on, take Rose, and walk the dog for an hour. Just get out of the house, and then call me back." So I gave him something to do to change his the way he was thinking. And Rose got it mostly because she was with the guy 24 hours a day. And if you want the truth as we're ending this thing, Bill was a big pain in the ass.
No doubt about it. I endorse that 100%.
We're going to open this up to questions. I want to say one thing, because this conversation is depressing the hell out of me. So I'll end on one more depressing note. I had a dear friend who was depressed, who killed himself some years ago. And I wasn't just angry that he killed himself. I was angry that he was depressed. Angry all the time. And it took me a long time to forgive him. Suicide didn't help, just made me angrier. You can't help it. You just can't help being depressed. There is nothing that lets you step away from it at somebody else's behest. And that's what makes it intricate. And that's what makes it deadly. So I think you have to forgive it. And I think it helps us all live with it. Doesn't mean don't treat it. It doesn't mean don't work with it. It just means forgive it. Oh, I know. You got something. Go.
But the thing you have to remember, if people talk about it, they don't really want to do it. They want to have you talk them out of it. But the dangerous ones are the ones that don't say anything, the silent ones. We saw the guy in the White House under Clinton, and he didn't tell anyone. And when you see the suicides, it's usually people that never were in touch with anybody. But if a person says, I'm going to kill myself, it's your signal to say, no, you're not, because he really wants to be talked out of it.
Okay, so we're going to open up. I just will end by saying this, which is, for all the depression we talked about tonight, are you depressed?
I refuse to answer that.
Are you depressed, Bill? Are you depressed?
I don't know.
Are you depressed?
No, they have.
I'm not depressed either. So the fact is, if you wait and if you work, it passes, and then you get to smile and not be depressed, except for Bill, apparently. I'm going to connect you thing again. Thank you all. We're going to do questions now. We'll do 5 minutes or something, and then...
Hold on, go ahead.
No, I got it. Yeah. Okay, so you guys... And look, they have the questions
out.
Of Mike's.
If you don't mind, I'd like to hear both of you make a comment that during these periods, very low periods that you went through, obviously with the issue of incredible fatigue and low energy, but how did it affect your own daily dealing with your creativity as writers? How did you battle that? What were the little techniques you used? Or was there no question that you couldn't deal with your own creative skills?
Well, I would maintain that if you have a severe depression, creativity is out of the question. I would think at a certain mild level of this illness, a kind of garden variety of melancholia, you might be able to create. But I think it's depression in its severest form precludes any kind of creativity. That's what causes it to be such a horror. At least that's my experience. I think it's probably general.
And depression causes depression. For example, in my case, I'll be personal about it, when I was in a depression, I thought I'd never be funny again, that I would never write again, and I was finished as a human being, and I had no respect for myself, I had no respect for anything. So in answer to your question, creativity went out the window, and all you could think about was what an unworthy person you were.
Anybody have any comments about the possible relationship or the relationship between religion and mental illness, or mental illness and religion?
Well, one of the most common, weirdly, forms of ideation in schizophrenia, I think it's disorder. Aliens, God, the CIA. That's all I got to say, huh? You're on your own.
Well, you know that we live in a world in which, if you do have religion, I'm all for it. I think it's great, and I think it's helpful, because there's something there. If you don't have anything to believe in, I think it's twice as bad for your depression. So if someone is, part of the religion, and the Catholics now are recognizing a lot of these things which they did before, and A lot of the psychiatrists are Jewish. Don't ask me why. But yes, I think that religion is a very helpful thing in a depression.
I claim immunity to that question because I'm an agnostic and myself, and I would hate to think at the moment of truth, the moment I was to plunge into oblivion, that I had to call on God. I mean,
yeah, he's an agnostic, and he also doesn't take pills.
That's right.
I want to thank you for sharing your personal stories. It's so brave. Thank you. The title of this evening, The Creative Process and Mental Health or Mental Illness, obviously you can't be creative if you're so depressed that you're catatonic or not moving. But the flip side, if you're taking an antidepressant, you're suddenly happier, you're contented. Are you therefore creating? What about you've cited studies that say depression seems to be linked with creativity. Therefore, if you are quote unquote curing or recovering from depression, are you becoming mindless and not creative and happy and a contented cow or something? And I mean, people actually said to me when I was going to fall in love, well, if you get married and are happy and have babies, you won't be writing anymore. Do you have to be depressed?
No. You don't have to be depressed to write. Creativity is the mind at work. And it's that's what it comes from. The creativity is just sitting in an audience and listening and talking. That's creativity. So it doesn't have to be a big deal. And of course, the women in this audience, though, postpartum.
Postpartum.
Yeah. And there's a lot of that, too. But I believe that in my case, I'll probably be taking these pills for the rest of my life, which will probably break me. I won't have any money left. But all I can tell you is now I would be afraid not to take them anymore. I would be afraid not to.
You don't take pills.
Well, I think the stigma that anti-anxiety and anti-anxiety agents and antidepressants impact negatively on creativity is just the worst thing we've ever done to ourselves. Charles Adams started this. Used to be psychotherapy. That was what would get rid of your ability to be creative. Charles Adams was drawing cartoons for the New Yorker and just was really unhappy looking at cartoons. And was terrified to go get happy lest he said something funny. It doesn't work that way. Your anxiety, beyond a certain level, doesn't fuel your creativity, and it inhibits it. And God knows your depression, leaves you in bed with a pillow over your head. So I am always scared of this. It feels very generational to me. It feels like we happen to live in a historical moment where people are saying this, just like 20 years ago we happened to live in a historical moment where psychotherapy was going to do that. And in 50 years, nobody will take seriously the fact that we believe this so seriously. So I say to you only, if you are suffering and scared that you will be a sucky writer, stop suffering. You'll be exactly as sucky as you are or not today.
But for example, humor is a good thing to examine because if I can make you laugh, I'm contacted with you. That's very important for me, and I guess for you, that we're on the same wavelength. And therefore, besides all the depressions, which was only 2, by the way, I have been able to be on the same wavelength with my audience. And that's good because it pays very well. And so I'm not worried about depression. I'm not worried about it. I'm very much watching it, like we all are. You say, I don't want to go there again. I never want to go there again. It is so bad and so horrible. I don't want to go there again. And I've been able, since 85 now, not to go there again. And I'm glad. And it might have been bipolar, but I've been able to lick it. So that's all I ask in life right now.
Fair enough.
You guys seem to have established your careers before your depression. What kind of financial impact did it have, and really on your careers, and how did that affect your depression?
It didn't make much difference to me. I was poor enough to begin with, so it wasn't a. I'm exaggerating. It didn't. I don't think it had any. I was covered by insurance. Is that what you're talking about?
Kind of, because therapy's expensive, and
well, it is expensive. But as I say, in my case, one time I was covered by insurance, the other time by Medicare. So
you probably couldn't create.
Well, that's quite true. That creativity shut down, but it didn't last forever. I recovered in both instances, got back to work. So it was minimal in my case.
The question was how much did it affect you?
Well, it's very funny because all these hospitalization plans and all these medical plans say you're only allowed to have a depression for 60 days. And then you're out. So if you don't solve your depression in 60 days, tough luck. And there's money involved with this, a lot of money involved. The drug companies, mental health institution, and therefore, I'm sorry for you people out there because whoever you are, it's very, very expensive. And even with Medicare, it's very expensive. And there's something wrong in the society where we're not providing health for the people who not only need it, but if they got it, it'd be much better people than they are right now.
This is fascinating. Mr. Buchwald, you posit the case of someone who has lost his job, right? Okay. So let's say he's lost his job, and of course his wife's going to leave him, and the dog bites him, and everything's going wrong, and most of us would legitimately say, hey, you've got a right to be depressed. On the other hand, doesn't that seem different from Mr. Styron, living on Martha's Vineyard and having a loving wife and, a reputation as a writer and being secure and all that, and also being depressed? Are these two different types of, they're both legitimate. I don't know. Are they different, or do they have the same source?
I don't know what the depression, it's triggered. You can be triggered by losing your job. And I have a column, which, by the way, the LA Times dumped me, the View section they dumped me, so I'm very mad at them. And I would like to ask Eladia to go down to the LA Times after this and burn the place. But I wrote a column about a guy who came home. He lost his job. And he lost his job because a guy in China got the job. We are sending so many jobs overseas now that the people are getting cut back. And this president of ours, the commander-in-chief, isn't paying any attention to what's going on with the people in his own country. Right.
Okay, last question.
Well, you've been talking about recovery and riding this thing through. Is there anything that you noticed within yourselves that you had actually done to help you get through this? Something specific, an individual that you felt really got you personally through this?
Anything that you found personally that got you through your recovery, that helped you climb out of your depression?
That you actually did.
Well, I guess so. I think one of the things my doctor said to me was that I was a good patient. So I didn't fight the depression. I knew I was in it. There was talk about me getting electrical treatment. Did you have that? They were talking about it, but they didn't have to do it. And so I just eventually got through it. And the interesting thing was, after I got through it, I went right back to work.
Same thing. I was a compliant patient, and I think that I finally relaxed and seized my rebellion against the idea of shrinks being dominating and bullies.
You were a pain in the ass on that.
It was, yeah.
Really?
I even got over that.
You never found a shrink he really liked, right?
Absolutely.
Listen, we want to thank you for coming, leave you on this notion that there is a lot of loss in life and there's a lot of joy in life, and it's just about deciding what your brain is going to fasten on to. So it's fleeting. Don't be sad. Have a nice night.